Choices are made in a single second, yet their consequences linger like an emotional life sentence. Beneath the dazzling lights of the Golden Gate Bridge and the roaring descent of cars along Lombard Street, a man chose to sacrifice his body to save the very woman who had once broken his heart. He didn't know that the impact would not only destroy his lower half, but also open a chain of exploitation, betrayal, and unbearable pain. Yet, within that ruin, fate was quietly preparing for a love without conditions, a love he had never expected, but one he needed more than anything. His story begins with brokenness, only for each shattered piece to be mended by the hands of a woman who did not come from glittering lights, but from a heart that knew how to love unconditionally. A sleek black Porsche Cayenne slid past the Van Ness intersection like a silent flash. Inside sat Elijah Prescott, founder of Prescott Dynamics, a high-tech telecommunications empire and one of the most powerful black men on America's West Coast. Born and raised in Oakland, Elijah had clawed out of the shadows of East 15th Street to become a living emblem of the black American dream. But tonight, he did not feel strong. Not far ahead of him drove a familiar silver Lexus, bearing the license plate of Serena Voss, the woman who had once been his wife, the woman he had loved enough to sacrifice pride and reputation for. Serena the blonde, with a smile glinting like metal and a heart colder than the December Pacific winds. 3 years had passed since they signed divorce papers in a Soma law office, after their marriage collapsed in the wake of text messages between her and a financial advisor named Scott Lennox, who also happened to be Elijah's co-founder in an investment fund. Elijah wasn't following Serena. He had no intention of revisiting old ruins. But that night, fate had other plans. Serena lost control at the crest of Lombard Street, where the city lights spilled toward the waters of the San Francisco Bay. The Lexus skidded, tires screeching, veering toward the guardrail right before the infamous death curve meant to be taken at no more than 15 miles an hour. In less than a second, Elijah knew Serena would plunge into the ravine if he didn't act. He should have let it happen. He should have let karma do its work. But he didn't. He swerved left, floored the accelerator, and rammed his Porsche into the Lexus as it spun out of control. The crash thundered like lightning ripping through silence. Serena's car slammed into a streetlight, crumpled, but stopped short of the guardrail. Elijah's Porsche was not so lucky. The SUV spun 3 times, the rear wheels tearing loose, the windshield exploding into shards, and before the nose plowed into a towering redwood, detonating the airbags. Inside, Elijah's body whiplashed, skull striking the roof, blood streaming from his brow, then darkness. 3 days later, in the intensive care unit at UCSF Medical Center, Elijah opened his eyes. The first sensation wasn't pain, it was emptiness. His legs felt absent, like the blanket draped over him belonged to someone else. And then he saw Serena. She sat in a rumpled Burberry cashmere sweater, makeup washed away, eyes swollen, hair unkempt. She clutched his trembling hand. "Elijah, I don't know what to say," she whispered, panic threading her voice. "You saved my life, and I didn't deserve it. I owe you everything." Elijah said nothing, his gaze fixed on the cream-colored ceiling, haunted by Dr. Howard's words. "Spinal cord injury, T11, T12. I'm sorry, Mr. Prescott, but your walking ability cannot be restored. We'll focus on rehabilitating your upper body." Elijah had weathered storms before, but nothing had ever stripped him bare like this. No morning runs, no gala dances, no walking out of this room on his own. Yet Serena stayed. The next day, and for the next 8 weeks, she played the part of a devoted wife. 16-hour days at his bedside, taking notes, speaking with nurses, wiping his face during feverish nights. She whispered of fresh beginnings, of a second wedding to redeem the past. And deep inside, Elijah began to believe. He believed love could be rebuilt. He felt loyalty could mend betrayal. By the 3rd month, Elijah was moved to a rehab center in Napa Valley, famed for its neuroadaptive therapies. Serena moved in with him, transformed his room, handled doctors, food, and schedules. Each night, as exhaustion crushed him, she wrapped her arms around him. "We'll start over. All I need is you." But when Elijah slept, Serena called Scott Lennox, now her partner at Monroe and Lennox Capital, a firm quietly dismantling Prescott Dynamics. Elijah didn't know that each paper she coaxed him to sign insurance forms, treatment authorizations, was another nail in the coffin of his empire. Properties sold, accounts drained, the Pack Heights penthouse, the Klimt, the Banksy, and his mother's heirlooms vanished. And then, one morning, Elijah woke to a white, empty room. Serena was gone. On the table, a single note lay neatly folded. Elijah, you're the best man I've ever known, but I need someone I can walk beside, not someone I must carry forever. Forgive me for not being as strong as you. S. He sat motionless for hours. A part of him had always known this day would come, but another part collapsed like a child abandoned in the desert. That same day, his assistant Travis called, nearly broken, "Mr. Prescott, it's all gone. She sold the shares. The bank froze everything. All that's left is your grandfather's trust." Weeks later, Elijah moved into a small rental apartment in Oakland, back where it all began, only now, without legs, a wife, and an empire. Each night, he stared through the window at buses rolling past, jazz drifting from distant nightclubs, memories of feet that once danced to melodies long gone. And he thought, if only I hadn't turned the wheel that night. But Elijah didn't know fate still held one gift in its hands. A love not meant to repay, but to heal. A woman who would come not to bask in glory, but to rebuild from ashes. And that beginning was near. The small third-floor apartment overlooking Lake Merritt, Oakland, had never been built for a man in a wheelchair. But it was all that remained after every asset had been sold, every share transferred, every penthouse with private security and automatic espresso machines erased from Elijah's life like a fading dream consumed by fire. He lived in 2 bedrooms, a living room with an open kitchen, hardwood floors peeling, cracks running down the plaster where the heating pipes bled. The ceiling leaked whenever Oakland rains poured, and the sounds from the Thai restaurant below often rose past midnight. Sizzling pans, cooks cursing, hip-hop beats mixed with the smell of grease, onions, and cheap liquor. Nothing in that space reminded Elijah of the life he once had except his body, strapped into a custom graphite wheelchair designed for a man who used to be worth millions. He hated himself, not because he couldn't walk, but because he had believed, because he had sacrificed, because he had convinced himself that old love could be rebuilt over the deepest fracture. And he had let Serena Voss, the woman who destroyed him, once return to deliver the final blow. Every morning, he woke at 5 a.m., not out of will, but because sleep abandoned him. No blanket could smother the cold gnawing inside. And every morning, he fought alone to get out of bed, bracing arms, twisting hips, sliding into the chair. Each act demanded strength that his faith no longer carried. No one came by, except one man. Travis Bennett, Elijah's former assistant, had not deserted him in the storm of betrayal. Travis, small-framed, bright-eyed, born in a Native American community in New Mexico, appeared faithfully on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, carrying coffee from a Franklin Street cafe and scraps of paperwork from the ghost of Prescott Dynamics. Elijah, Travis set the cup on the counter. Hartford approved the last insurance payment. Not much, but enough to stretch 6 more months at your current spending. Elijah didn't reply. His eyes drifted toward the window, where dawn spilled across the tin roof of the car wash across the street. Raindrops from the night glistened like raw diamonds, but they only weighed heavily on him. "Put it into the reconstruction fund," he said flatly. "Any proceeds left from asset liquidation?" "Barely. Most of it was offloaded by Lennox and Serena last month. All we've left is the Jeep in San Mateo and the warehouse in Modesto." Elijah gave a dry laugh. "I once held stakes in 3 commercial satellite firms. Travis sponsored conferences at MIT, signed contracts with the Mexican government for wireless tech. And now I'm clinging to a warehouse?" Travis bowed his head, silent. "Physical therapy 3 times a week. Mental torture disguised as rehabilitation. At an Oakland rehab center, Dr. Amos Gaines, a former Paralympic athlete turned spinal recovery specialist, pushed Elijah through grueling sets for arms, back, and shoulders. "You're stronger than you think, Elijah," Amos said, voice deep as church drums. "But your attitude is crippling you faster than your legs." "I don't need philosophy," Elijah panted. "I need to walk. And if I can't, at least stop me from feeling like garbage." Amos laid a hand on his shoulder, broad, heavy as timber. "You used to be a symbol. You can still be one. But if you don't forgive yourself, Serena still owns you even after she's gone." Elijah stared at him, a former Marine who had lost both legs in Iraq, now walking with prosthetics and an unbreakable will, and Elijah gave a bitter laugh. "You're the exception, Amos. Me? I'm just a fool who loved the wrong woman twice." Evenings were the worst. When the city quieted and night draped itself across the bay, Elijah sat by the window, no lights on, silent. Watching the cars trail across I-880 like streaks of fading starlight, he remembered Serena's smile, the brush of her hand when she whispered, "You're the one I need." The promises of a second wedding with sunflowers, the flowers his mother once planted in the backyard on East 17th Street. Now they were blood-soaked dreams, stabbing him each time they surfaced. He wondered, had Serena ever truly loved him, even for a second? Or had every moment from their first meeting at the Stanford Innovation Center gala been calculated? In long insomniac hours, Elijah sometimes heard footsteps running, though he knew his legs would never move again. They were there, dangling beneath him, useless, dead weight, humiliating. He dreamt of rising, of running to embrace the wife who betrayed him, only to wake with a chill biting down his spine. And then, one night, he wrote without knowing why. Dragging out an old laptop, he opened a blank document. He typed, "I once had everything. And I lost it all because of one act, saving someone unworthy." The first page. Then the second. The next morning, Travis arrived to find Elijah still awake, shadows under his eyes, but a spark flickering within. "You writing something?" Travis asked. "No. I'm taking back the last thing Serena couldn't steal." "What's that?" Elijah's eyes sharpened like blades. "My voice." But Elijah didn't know. While he wrestled to heal, she was already near. Not dazzling like Serena. He was not as sharp as the Silicon Valley power players he once worked with. She carried a different kind of light, not glittering like diamonds, but glowing like an oil lamp in the dark, warm enough to revive a man nearly dead inside. Her name was Amira Caldwell, and she was about to step through the doors of Prescott Dynamics, the hollow, shrunken remnant of the empire Elijah had built from nothing, holding a modest resume for an administrative assistant role, a resume simple enough to be overlooked, yet destined to change everything. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight, Elijah still sat by the window, hand resting on his wheelchair rim, wondering whether God ever loved those who had already lost it all. They say sometimes light doesn't come from the sky, but from how someone steps into an old room and makes it glow without flipping a switch. Elijah had never believed that until one Tuesday morning in November, when she walked in. No makeup, quiet steps, a bundle of worn resumes in her arms, and eyes brown, steady, carrying storms they had already survived. Amira Caldwell, 28, was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the only daughter of a night shift nurse and a welder father who lost his job during the oil crisis. She had come to California with a dream of studying technology, once a computer engineering student at UCLA, until her final year was cut short when her mother suffered a stroke. Amira worked wherever she could, cafes, libraries, and record rooms at a small financial consultancy before it folded in a merger. And now she stood there in a crisp white shirt, grey skirt, hair braided neatly behind her before the faded reception desk of Prescott Dynamics. What once was a corporate empire had shrunk to a modest office in an Oakland commercial building, its sign weathered, its fluorescent lights flickering. "Hi, I'm Travis," the assistant, executive director, and coffee maker all rolled into one, extended a hand. "You're here for the administrative assistant position?" "Yes. I sent my resume last week, and you confirmed the interview today." Travis nodded, glancing at the folder she placed on the desk. Clean, orderly, nothing special among hundreds of others. But then he saw something different. the handwritten letter attached. I know the company is in transition. I don't have a showcase of achievements, but I know how to keep things running quietly. And if there's ever a need for someone who stays when everyone else leaves, then I am that person. Amira Caldwell. Something in Travis stirred. Maybe it was the unadorned sincerity. Maybe, after all the losses, what they needed most wasn't brilliance but someone who wouldn't walk away. Elijah will see you, Travis said, leading her in. Elijah's office now resembled a small apartment. No boardroom, no assistants. Just a desk, a worn leather chair, dusty shelves, and a single photo on the wall. His mother, standing before their East 17th Street house, clutching sunflowers. Elijah turned his wheelchair when the door opened. He didn't look up immediately, his eyes fixed on the blinking cursor of a manuscript draft. The world once called me a pioneer, yet I never knew how to hold on to a heart. Sorry to interrupt. Amira's voice is soft but steady. Elijah looked up and froze. Not because she was terrific, she wasn't the kind to turn heads on the street, but because of her eyes. No judgment, no pity, no discomfort in the wheelchair. Just the gaze of someone who knew loss, yet still carried faith in small things. Elijah Prescott, he extended his hand. You are Amira Caldwell, candidate for the assistant position. I believe you have my letter. He nodded, eyes fixed on her for 30 seconds, searching for cracks behind her simplicity. Then, with a breath, he said, Sit. I don't do conventional interviews. No. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? No. What are your strengths? I only have one question. Amira smiled faintly. Yes? If someone who once lied, betrayed you, made you lose, everything came back saying they were sorry, what would you do? The air sank heavy. Amira held his gaze. Long, then answered, slowly, word by word. I would listen, but I would not open my heart again. Not if it meant losing myself once more. Elijah sat silent, then exhaled, almost in relief. You're hired. No trial period. Her brows lifted. You don't know what I can do, but I know you're not pretending, and that's enough. From that day forward, something invisible shifted in the shrunken office of a fallen empire. Amira didn't ask much. She arrived at 7:30 a.m. and left at 6 p.m. She organized files, revived a dead coffee machine, and rebuilt surviving investments records. She adjusted Elijah's desk height to suit his wheelchair, redesigned the meeting area for virtual conferences with former partners, the same ones who had turned away when he fell. And most importantly, she listened. When Elijah raged over missing documents, she didn't react. When his pain made him sharp, she didn't take offense. When he sighed after Zoom calls with CEOs who once called him a brother, she poured ginger tea silently, setting it before him without a word. One late afternoon, sunlight streaking through the window, Elijah asked, Why did you choose to come here? This company has no promise left, and I have nothing left to give anyone. Amira sat across, eyes tilted steady, because I know what it feels like when everyone leaves. And I think, sometimes people don't need something grand, they need someone to stay. At the right moment, Elijah said nothing, but something inside him shifted. 2 months later, Travis rushed in with urgent news. Elijah, you need to see this. In his hand, a report from Monroe and Lennox Capital, Serena's firm. It contained plans to acquire land once meant for Prescott's first civilian telecom center along the US-Mexico border. Elijah's fury flared. They're profiting off my idea. Using designs I built back in 2016. Amira stood beside him, silent, then spoke gently. If they're using intellectual property that is not legally cleared, you could sue. No lawyer would stand with me now. She opened her laptop. Give me 3 days. I'll find one. Elijah scoffed. Who do you think you are, Perry Mason? She didn't laugh. Her eyes, unwavering. I'm not a lawyer. But I believe justice isn't a luxury for the rich. It's a principle that must not be abandoned, not even when everyone else has abandoned you. Elijah stilled. He felt he wasn't speaking to an employee for the first time in months, but to a friend. It rained on Monday morning, but no one inside the office noticed. Not because they were too busy, but because no storm outside could match the weight of the storms they had carried for months. Elijah sat before the screen, hands resting on his wheelchair rims, eyes locked on the report from Monroe and Lennox Capital. "They're really going to do it," he muttered. "They'll build the border project with the very technology I designed Serena's fingerprints on every line of code." Travis nodded. "We have 90 days to file opposition. After that, the construction license goes through and is over." Elijah dropped his head into his hands. "I can't fight another legal war." Across from him, Amira watched quietly. No panic in her face, only the stillness of someone who had weathered storms before. She stepped closer and set a small cup before him, not coffee, but warm turmeric water. "If you don't fight this one," she said, "you'll live forever knowing you surrendered." Elijah looked up. For a moment, he saw his reflection in her eyes, not a disabled man, but someone who had endured enough to know that silence could kill. "But who would stand with me?" His voice cracked, an admission. "No law firm dares face Monroe and Lennox. They've bought nearly every corridor of California's judiciary." Amira said nothing. She opened her laptop, typed, and turned the screen toward him. The name read, Yara Ellington, independent attorney, San Leandro, California. Elijah frowned. "Never heard of her." "Because she's outside the system," Amira replied. Once one of the youngest federal prosecutors in the Bay Area, she refused to prosecute a staged immigrant entrapment case ordered for political gain. She was punished, pushed out of power circles. Now she runs a one-woman office. No connections, but principles. Elijah gave a bitter laugh. "Principles don't fund a legal war against Serena Voss. But principles," Amira's voice steady, "can begin a new life." Yara's office sat on Bancroft Avenue, between a Palestinian grocery and a veterinary clinic. No gleaming sign, just a wooden plaque. Yara Ellington, SQ. Justice has no favorites. She was a black woman in her early 40s, tall, hair tied back, eyes sharp enough to slice through a forged verdict. White shirt, jeans, a worn watch. Her desk was cluttered with law books, files, and a small cactus surviving by the window, the only sign of life in a room that had seen more battles than peace. "You're Elijah Prescott," she said after Amira's introduction. "The man who's lost every fight lately," Elijah answered dryly. "And the man who coded the first AI-driven satellite navigation system for extreme weather," she countered, unblinking. "I know you. I didn't think I'd see you here." Elijah sat still, Amira at his side, gaze steady with encouragement. Yara opened the file. "Miss Voss and her partner are using segments of original code that were never registered under the 2017 DMCA, correct?" Elijah nodded. "I wrote it in 2016, when I still ran the company. After the accident, she used my recovery time to alter ownership records. And no backups? I had one, but the system was hacked a week after she left." Yara closed her eyes briefly. "So all evidence is in their hands?" "No," Amira spoke. "I found a temporary backup in the Modesto warehouse on an old hard drive. Not enough to prove everything, but enough to trace encrypted logs back to the original author." Yara turned, her eyes shifting, not suspicion now, but respect. "You're a lawyer?" "No, just someone who refuses injustice." A small smile curved Yara's lips. "That's enough." The next 3 weeks were a race against the clock. Yara filed an official complaint with the Northern District Federal Court of California. She knew the first motion would be denied, but the goal was to make the case public record. Travis combed through old emails, searching for proof Serena knew the code wasn't hers. Amira handled logistics and information and unearthed a 2016 meeting recording where Serena's voice declared, "Elijah, this code is pure genius. I'll never understand how you wrote it." That careless praise, captured in an old Zoom archive, became the key to unlocking the case. On the day of the trial, Elijah didn't walk into court. He rolled in on wheels. Not as a CEO, not as a founder, but as a man who had lost everything except the truth. Yara's argument cut not with noise, but with the cold precision of someone who had seen justice sold cheap and had come to reclaim its price. They can take shares. They can seize offices. They can rewrite ownership on paper. But no one can erase the fingerprints of a hand that bled, built, that trusted naively that love would not betray the moment it saw weakness. The courtroom fell silent. Across the aisle, Serena sat, expression carved in stone but her hands clenched. The judge ruled, Prescott Dynamics was the rightful owner of the Alpha Vector 9 source code. Serena Voss could also face an investigation for intellectual property theft. As they left the courthouse, Elijah didn't raise his head like a conqueror. He only turned to Amira and whispered, soft as wind, "You just saved something I thought was dead." Amira said nothing, but her eyes, bright as the day she first walked into that small room, spoke everything. And what Elijah didn't know was, this was only the beginning of a return. That afternoon, sunlight slanted through the frosted glass of Prescott Dynamics' office. A fresh copy of the court ruling lay on the desk, ink still drying. Elijah let his fingers trace the words, "Legal ownership of the Alpha Vector 9 source code restored to Elijah Prescott," as if struggling to believe truth could truly exist on paper. Travis popped open a champagne bottle, clumsily sending the cork ricocheting against the ceiling like a stray bullet. "We won," he shouted. "Elijah, we actually won." Elijah smiled faintly, though not brightly. It was the smile of a man stepping out of a desert not for joy, but for finally finding water. He raised his glass and sipped lightly, yet his eyes drifted to the doorway where Amira stood, quiet, holding her usual cup of ginger tea. "You're not celebrating?" Elijah asked. The "you" slipped from his tongue naturally, as though no boundaries of rank, class, or guardedness had ever existed between them. "No," Amira replied. "I didn't come to celebrate victory. I came because you needed someone who wouldn't leave when you lost." The room fell still. Elijah set his glass down and wheeled closer. "You've saved me, many times. But why?" Amira met his gaze without flinching. "Because I was once the one no one saved. I know how that pain feels, and I swore I would never let anyone walk through it alone if I could help." Elijah drew a deep breath. "I thought I died in 2019 when the accident happened, when Serena betrayed me, when everything I built collapsed like dominoes. But you came, quiet, steady, as if I was still worth saving." "You still are," Amira said. "The world just forgot." Elijah turned away, not to hide, but to keep tears from falling. His voice trembled. "Do you know how many nights, at 3 a.m., staring at a blank screen, I thought about ending it all?" Amira stepped closer, hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You're not the only one who's ever thought that. But you stayed, and staying can change someone else's entire world." Elijah looked up. They were close enough to hear each other's breaths in the silence between two people too familiar with hurt. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not being afraid of the dark in me." "Because I know," Amira answered softly. "Light doesn't come to perfect people. It comes to guide those who've been lost." The following week, life surged forward, calls from old partners, bank accounts unfrozen. An investment fund from Seattle offered $5 million to revive the project, now renamed Phoenix Grid, like the firebird rising from ashes. Elijah's name was no longer buried. Podcasts, tech magazines, headlines. "The man they tried to bury has returned," or Elijah Prescott, a symbol of tech resurrection. But in the noise, Elijah cared for only one thing: protecting the peace he found in Amira and proving himself worthy of it. He watched her quietly, still early in, late out, still steady. But now, there was something new in her glow, not the flash of money or fame, the light of someone slowly allowing herself to trust again. One evening, Elijah invited her to his apartment where he'd lived since the accident. Small, simple, but not as cold as expected from the man who had everything and lost it all. He cooked pasta and salad, imperfect but earnest. Amira laughed, watching him wrestle with a jar of tomato sauce. "Don't help me," Elijah said. "I need to prove I can still do it." "Fine," she teased. "But if the floor turns red, I'm not calling the cops." After dinner, they sat on the balcony, breeze drifting through the park trees, street lamps glowing dim gold. Nothing extravagant, but in its ordinariness, something unforgettable. "Do you believe," Elijah asked, voice low but no longer afraid, "that two people come together not because they're perfect, but because they understand each other's wounds?" Amira turned, eyes glistening. I don't just believe it, she said. I'm living it. Right now. Elijah needed no more words. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached for her hand. Amira didn't pull away. And in that moment, nothing else was required. No kiss, no music, no candlelight. Only this. Two broken people learning again how to trust piece by piece. Elijah made a shocking choice the next day. He rejected the $5 million Seattle investment. You've lost your mind, Travis cried. We need that money to restructure. We don't need money from those who once backed Serena, who fueled border exploitation projects, Elijah said firmly. Rebirth doesn't mean rebuilding on the same rotten foundation. Amira's Khaza, half worried, half proud, met his. Elijah, I'll stand with you if you're certain. He took her hand. I'm not certain of everything, but I am certain you are the best thing left after all. And this time, she didn't just hold his hand back. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. No one expected Serena Voss to return, at least not like this. 3 weeks after Elijah's legal victory, a plain white envelope appeared on Elijah's desk as Prescott Dynamics' office buzzed with draft contracts, invitations to New York and Seattle tech conferences, and hundreds of emails from young coders eager to join. He picked it up. A Chicago postmark. Black ink. Strong, deliberate strokes. He didn't recognize the handwriting, but inside was a single line. I'm not done, and neither are you. S. Elijah stared at the ink as though he could burn through it and glimpse the ghost who once ruled his life. Rage surged, but his hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. Amira stepped in and saw the note in his grip. She scanned it, no questions, no panic, just a long exhale. She never plays a game without a hidden ace, Amira said. You know that. Elijah nodded. But this time, I won't be caught off guard. 2 days later, Serena Voss stood at a press podium in Washington, D.C. Under the gleaming banner of Halcyon Systems, a rising defense tech firm specializing in cybersecurity and AI border enforcement. In a deep blue suit, smile flawless, she introduced herself as Senior Creative and Technology Director of Halcyon, the federal government's new partner in restructuring southern border control. We're not just building technology, she declared. We're redefining the line between freedom and security. Beside her, a Republican congressman clapped. A military general nodded. Flashbulbs exploded. Only Elijah, sitting in his Oakland office with a printout from Halcyon's official site, knew. The Sentinel X they unveiled was none other than his Phoenix grid, copied, encrypted, renamed. She used your code illegally copied, retooled under a private platform, shielded from civil court jurisdiction, Travis analyzed grimly. Legally, she's untouchable again. Amira said nothing at first. Then, softly, unless we prove she accessed the system while the first trial was still active, that would violate the injunction. Elijah looked up. What do you mean? There's something I haven't told you, Amira said. When I found the temporary backup in Modesto, it contained a log string of access from an unknown IP Virginia. Langley? Travis asked. No. Amira shook her head. Fairfax County. Exactly. Halcyon Systems office. Before Serena publicly joined them, Elijah shot upright. If we trace that IP, if it matches her old Prescott account, then she didn't just break the injunction, she committed a federal breach. One spring night, in Elijah's apartment, they gathered screens filled with lines of code, access histories, digital footprints. Amira barely spoke. Earbuds in, her fingers flew across the keyboard like a secret symphony. Elijah watched, struck not by her skill but by the unyielding commitment blazing through her, the kind he once thought existed only in blind love, now living in clear-eyed resolve. Got it, Amira said at last. Original IP pinged the Phoenix Grid archive. MAC address matches the device Serena used at Prescott. Timestamp, 4:21 a.m., March 19th, while the trial was still in session. She violated a court order, Travis hissed. Not just that, Amira added. She used a ghost account under the alias Everly Knox, but the server's security still logged her original digital fingerprint. Elijah whispered, She really thinks she's God. Amira turned toward him, eyes lifting from the screen for the first time that night. No, Elijah. She thinks you'll never get back up. The very next day, Yara Ellington returned to Oakland. She sat in Prescott's conference room, coffee in hand, gaze sharp as a blade. "We can't hit her with the same strategy," Yara said flatly. "Halcyon is a defense contractor, shielded under the National Data Security Act. To take them down, we must prove Serena didn't just break the law, she betrayed the public trust. She's secretly selling Phoenix Grid to international lobbyists," Travis interjected. "I've got whistleblower files from inside Halcyon. Still verifying." Yara nodded. "If that holds, we can escalate to federal court. But it will be dangerous." Elijah sat still. At length, he spoke. "Nothing is more dangerous than letting her keep using technology to control people." "Good," Yara said. "Then we go all the way." Yet amid strategy, evidence, and plots, Elijah began noticing a silence growing in Amira. She worked endlessly, ate and slept irregularly, skipped press briefings, and stopped visiting his apartment. One night, Elijah went to her office. The door was ajar, lights still on. He found her curled in a corner, holding an old photograph, her mother. The woman had once been unjustly fired from airport security after Phoenix Grid's prototype flagged unverified immigrant data from her pre-1980 file. "You didn't know," Amira whispered, eyes brimming. "I once thought destroying Phoenix Grid would be revenge for her." Elijah froze. "I thought you forgave." "I thought so too," she said softly. "But now, seeing Phoenix reborn as Sentinel X, I feel like that child again, sitting outside the courthouse, waiting for a mother who would never be called back." Elijah lowered himself beside her. "You don't have to forgive," he murmured. "You just have to live honestly with your wound." And for the first time, Amira wept not from rage, but from the raw relief of being seen. Not judged, not asked to be strong. Elijah wrapped his arms around her not as a savior, but as someone who had been broken too. Someone learning to love again, a soul also stitching itself back together. At dawn, Washington, D.C. looked like a dusty dream where every seat of power wore mist as its cloak, and every truth passed through the sieve of censorship. Elijah stood by the hotel window, staring down Pennsylvania Avenue, as the first light sliced across the White House, like a surgeon's cut. He hadn't slept, not from worry, but because he knew today would be the last day he allowed himself silence. On the table lay a leaked dossier from inside Halcyon Systems, sent by an anonymous engineer signing only as Osprey, a man who had finally betrayed Serena Voss after 17 years under her shadow. Inside were fragments of the original Phoenix Grid code copied, disguised, hidden in Sentinel X libraries, and scrawled in red ink. "Serena knows. She oversees it all. This is the devil's fingerprint. She no longer hides." Elijah closed his eyes, his breath slowed. Every cell of his body gathered for one decisive strike. Behind him, Amira entered, carrying a leather folder tidy, cold as an unopened indictment. "The federal judge agreed to a hearing," she said. "We have 45 minutes to present." "And her?" Elijah asked without turning. "She'll be there, as confident as ever." Elijah turned at last. "She's no longer a symbol of technology." "No," Amira replied softly. "Now she's the symbol of the price deceit must pay." Courtroom 4C, Federal District Court, D.C., was packed with journalists and delegates from major tech firms, Cyrotech, Helios Group, even the Department of Defense. Serena Voss entered in a tailored black dress, her smile untouched by time. Two attorneys from Whitmore and Daines flanked her, renowned for twisting law itself into camouflage. She glanced at Elijah, and her smile faltered for the briefest second. Not from fear, but from knowing he was no longer the trembling coder she once charmed in Prescott's server room. The hearing began. Yara Ellington laid out the evidence. Code strings, login records, digital fingerprints, Osprey's testimony. Each word she spoke slashed deeper into the empire Serena had constructed. Serena's lawyer pounced. "Your Honor, this is nothing but defamation. Phoenix Grid is obsolete. Sentinel X is an entirely new platform. Any resemblance is coincidental or due to untraceable open-source code." Elijah rose. His voice was low, but sharp as a blade. "Your Honor, I wrote Phoenix Grid from nothing. I know every semicolon. I can prove Sentinel X is its mutated twin enough for any honest coder to bow their head. He turned to Serena, and I am willing to swear. She, Serena Voss, stole it, while the first trial was still active. A ripple of whispers filled the chamber. The judge demanded silence. Serena remained motionless, silent, unblinking. Then Amira spoke. She didn't read from notes. Her eyes were fixed on the bench. Phoenix Grid was sold as America's safeguard. But from the start, it was used to erase people like my mother, an immigrant woman labeled a risk because the system couldn't read her pre-1980 papers. That wasn't just a technical failure. It was a moral failure. Her voice didn't tremble. It carried the weight of millions once silenced. And today, silence itself had been armed with a blade. When the hearing closed, the judge withheld a verdict. But he ordered Halcyon Systems to suspend all Sentinel X deployment pending full investigation. Justice cannot be rushed, he said, but neither can it be delayed another day. Elijah and Amira stepped out into the May sunlight, a light that hadn't touched them since the beginning of it all. Across the street, Serena slid into a waiting limo. This time, no cameras flashed, no applause, no spotlights. Only the wind lifting her hair and a chill that no fame could warm. That night, in Elijah's apartment, words were few. Amira brewed mint tea. Elijah played a Coltrane ballad Naima on a dusty speaker. The silence between them was no longer an obstacle, but a vow unspoken. Elijah looked at her. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She set her cup down. "Afraid? Yes. But I also know. If truth isn't spoken, silence becomes complicity." He nodded. "I once thought justice was judgment. Now I think it's a choice not to become like her." Amira took his hand. "We don't have to be like anyone. We only have not to betray ourselves." A short pause, a long silence, and their first kiss, not fierce, not cinematic, not the wet cliché of film. Just two broken souls, brave enough to trust once more, choosing to place faith in something uncertain, in each other. That morning, sunlight flooded Elijah's apartment, like the world had changed seasons overnight. Amira woke slowly. She felt Elijah's arm still wrapped gently around her waist, not possessive, not demanding, simply as though he were protecting something fragile and sacred, something he himself had never quite believed real. She didn't know when love had begun. Was it when they stood side by side against Serena? When he handed her a cup of tea the night of the verdict? Or in the moment they both admitted, truth must be set free, but the heart must be guarded? She turned toward him. Elijah was still asleep, but the peace on his face was new. For years, he had lived as a man always ready for court, but never prepared to be loved. Now, he was, even if he hadn't said the words. By noon, Elijah took Amira to a small riverside cafe in Georgetown, the place he once visited on his mother's birthday. A woman who had spent her life protecting the family's honor, only to be smeared by the press for daring to expose her former company. That story faded into obscurity, but for Elijah, it was the first gust that lit the fire of justice within him. He told Amira everything, as violin music floated from a street corner. "My mother once said, if truth is a blade, then honor must be the sheath, because you can't always strike, but you need something to keep your integrity safe." Amira said nothing. She only tightened her hand around his, because she knew that speaking of the past was as challenging as facing the present for Elijah. He was the kind of man who chose silence to protect others. But for the first time, he decided to be open to defend himself. The next day, they were invited to a federal symposium on technology and ethics. Elijah would speak. Amira planned only to sit among the guests. Yet in her eyes, something had shifted. When Elijah stepped onto the stage, Amira looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, not as the Elijah of justice battles, but as her Elijah. He began, not with code or a manifesto, but with a story. "As a boy," he said, "I once asked my mother, how do I know I'm right when everyone else says I'm wrong? She gave me no answer, just handed me an old mirror and said, when you can look in here without shame, maybe your mistake is the truest thing you've ever done." From the audience, Amira bit her lip. Tears glimmered not from sentiment, but from recognition, For Elijah to speak of his childhood was a revolution inside him, and perhaps, she realized, it was time for her to start her own. Back at the apartment, Amira went straight to the desk that night. She opened her laptop, began an email, then paused. "Dear Miss Caldwell, I am grateful for the Athena Foundation scholarship, but now I cannot continue as a representative face for a system that never re-examined the biases in the algorithms it funded." She deleted, typed again. "Dear Miss Caldwell, I write not to ask, but to declare, I will continue researching algorithmic fairness under my name. I no longer wish to stand beneath the shadow of any institution that has never truly stood for people like my mother." She signed it, Amira Rahman. No titles, no foundation. And when she hit send, her heart lifted, light as though a door had swung open, not the door of academia, but the door of tomorrow. Elijah found her on the porch the next morning, holding 2 plane tickets. "Chicago?" he asked. "There's a conference on data, privacy, and immigration. I want us both to go." He half joked. "You want us to be the activist couple?" Amira shrugged. "No. I want us to be a couple brave enough to do the right thing without needing the title." Elijah paused. "You afraid?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "Of course. But if you walk with me, I'll go through any door, even one without a handle." She smiled, and for the first time, Elijah kissed her in daylight, in public, among strangers rushing past. It wasn't a kiss of possession. It was a prayer. That evening, as the wind moved through the trees in Rock Creek Park, Elijah and Amira sat side by side, gazing up at the sky. No lawsuits, no enemies, no stage to expose. Only 2 people who had once chosen loneliness for safety are now choosing love for courage. Amira whispered, like wind brushing his ear, "We don't have to be right all the time. But promise me this, we won't run away from anything, even from this love." Elijah nodded, and they sat there, long into the night, as if the whole of Washington, D.C. had paused its breath to make space for a love that needed no spectacle, only courage. She didn't run. She slipped away, like an equation unsolved, like an undertow without a name. In that moment, Amira Rahman was no longer the woman who had stood fearless in court, no longer the fighter in the world of technology. She was 17 again, the girl rejected by her first love because of the name Rahman and her mother's skin. She thought she had healed, but the truth was, old wounds had only been wearing masks of borrowed faith. That morning, sunlight streamed through Elijah's apartment window, but the bed was empty. The tea had gone cold, not a note left behind. Elijah stood motionless. He had grown used to people leaving, from the father who never called back, to the friend who betrayed him in his first startup. But Amira, she was different. She wasn't someone who would vanish into silence. And that silence broke his heart sharper than any farewell. He called her phone, never rang. He didn't chase, didn't beg. Elijah was not the man who sprinted after a disappearing silhouette in a crowded terminal. But that afternoon, he stood long at the Arlington Bridge, where they had once sat together after the hearing, where she whispered, "We don't need to be right all the time, but I want us not to run from anything." And now, she was running. Amira returned to New Haven not for memories, but for instinctive panic. The old apartment near Yale, with bare white walls and a single bed, became her silent shelter. For 3 days, she spoke to no one. She bought takeout and avoided the deliveryman's gaze. She stared at the ceiling each night, thinking of Elijah, how he listened silently, never tried to change her, and trusted her even when she didn't yet trust herself. And that was what terrified her. Afraid of being hurt, afraid of hurting him, fearful that such a beautiful love would collapse under the weight she carried. Her aunt had been divorced 3 times. Her mother had never entered a second relationship after fleeing her father. "Some people aren't born to be loved," her mother had said. "They're only meant to try to live decently." Amira had grown up believing that, and now Elijah was breaking it. On the 4th day, rain fell in New Haven. Amira ducked into a small second-hand bookstore to escape the downpour, but her eyes caught a leather-bound journal in a glass case. Letters never sent. Without thinking, she bought it. Back in her room, she opened the first page, and began to write. Elijah, I panicked, not because of you, but because I thought I'd ruin everything. I thought I was strong but didn't expect to be so weak in the face of unconditional kindness. I left before you could see the worst in me, but maybe that was how I hurt you most. I'm sorry, and if you still leave that door open, I'll come back not to erase my mistake, but to learn how not to repeat it. She closed the book, didn't send it, but the next morning, she boarded a train back to DC. The apartment door was unchanged. She knocked 3 times, no answer. But when it opened, Elijah stood there, his eyes rimmed dark, but no anger, only silence. Amira handed him the journal, said nothing. He read, didn't interrupt, didn't press. When he closed it, he asked only one question. What will you do if fear comes again? Her tears fell, but she didn't crumble. I'll speak. I won't let fear speak for me again. Elijah nodded. Didn't embrace her like a Hollywood ending. Didn't declare forgiveness, but he opened the door, let her step inside, and she understood. Forgiveness wasn't words. It was a space left open. That night, they sat on the wooden floor, together, no music, no phones, only breath, and the faint glow from the kitchen. Amira placed her hand over her heart. I thought I was healed, but I've only learned to live with the wound. Elijah clasped her hand. I've never been whole either, but I choose to love you with the pieces that still work. No promises, no forevers, only this. Elijah bought a second reading chair and placed it beside his own the next day, and Amira left her toothbrush in the bathroom. A grown love isn't built on words, but on quiet acts after nearly losing everything. That autumn morning, sunlight slipped through the window of their 8th-floor Georgetown apartment like a quiet blessing. Amira woke, not to an alarm, but to the soft tap of wood, Elijah setting up an easel by the balcony. He had risen early, brush in one hand, fresh coffee in the other. No words, no exchange, only presence. And when his eyes met hers, they spoke everything. They had lived together for 2 weeks since that panic, not as lovers rushing to fill a void, but as 2 people learning to build a safe space where love could grow without needing walls. Amira hadn't moved in because she needed a place. She had moved in because she chose not to live apart from her feelings anymore. Elijah didn't ask when it would become official. He cleared space on his bookshelf, leaving one shelf empty. And Amira quietly filled it with a framed photo of her mother. No one said, "We belong to each other." But that evening, they walked into the home of Alex and Mariam, Elijah's close friends, for their daughter's birthday party. For the first time, Elijah held Amira's hand in a crowd, not to show her off, but to say, "I'm no longer hiding her." Mariam smiled softly. "Elijah hasn't brought anyone along in 5 years. I was beginning to think he had a secret girlfriend in Canada." Amira laughed. The past didn't haunt her. She only watched Elijah playing with a 4-year-old, and she understood. People don't come into your life to complete what is missing. They come to create something entirely new. The following week, Amira turned down Stanford's full-time teaching offer. Not because she didn't feel honored, but because she realized she had spent years proving herself worthy in other people's eyes. For the first time, she wanted to do something for herself. She signed up for an evening creative writing class at a small art center in DuPont Circle. Every Thursday, she wrote about what had never been spoken about: her childhood, her mother, and a love she once thought impossible. Elijah never asked. But on the nights she returned late, there was always dinner waiting. Sometimes fried rice, sometimes a hurried sandwich, and always a note. "What did you write today?" She didn't answer at once. But that Saturday, when they read together, Amira handed him her first manuscript, a symphony of those who once believed they didn't deserve to be loved. Elijah said nothing after reading. He only held her close. That winter came early. Snow fell thick in December, a rare sight in the capital. Yet inside their small apartment, the warmth never dimmed. The morning Elijah proposed, there were no fireworks or oversized diamonds. Just a Tuesday, when Amira awoke to find a stack of papers on the breakfast table. Incorporation documents for the Rahman and Brooks Foundation, a nonprofit to support women of color in STEM. On the last page, a handwritten note. "If you sign this with me, you're not just a co-founder, you're partner." And we'll build this as we've built our love, day by day. Imperfect, but real. E.B. Amira smiled. She signed. No tears, no trembling, just a slow nod like a vow that needed no volume. Their wedding occurred the following spring, in a small garden north of Charlottesville, Virginia. Not hundreds of guests, just 27 close ones. Amira wore white, no veil. Her hair was loose and adorned with a wildflower her mother had planted. Elijah wore a navy suit, no tie. He held her hand, and when the minister asked, "Do you choose her, today and every day after, for no reason but because you want to?" Elijah said, "I don't choose once. I choose her again every morning." Amira replied, "And I'll always let you know I'm still here, even when I'm afraid." By summer, they moved into a new apartment near Rock Creek Park. It is not much larger, but has sunlit windows and a flower balcony. Amira hung a painting she'd made in college in the living room. Elijah built new shelves. On the first one sat two frames, one of Amira's mother and one of the aunts who raised Elijah. Neither of them had parents anymore, but since finding each other, neither had felt orphaned. Amira was invited to speak at a TEDx conference that year's end. Love is not a privilege, it is a choice. Standing before hundreds, she stepped onto the stage in a simple white shirt. She spoke of her path in science, of how success never erased scars. And she said her first true love did not come when she felt worthy, but when she was brave enough to stop running from herself. Love is not a prize for the flawless. It is the final refuge for those willing to admit their fractures and reach out for one another. Silence filled the hall. Then applause rose, a standing ovation. In the shadowed back row, Elijah watched. No tears, but his hand clenched his wedding ring. He knew she didn't need him to be whole, but she had chosen him out of all possibilities, and that was enough to make their choice sacred. Back home, Amira set down her shoes that evening, removed her coat, and pulled a pregnancy test from her pocket. She said nothing, just placed it on the kitchen counter, beside the cup of mint tea he had prepared. Elijah looked, didn't ask. He sat beside her, hand on hers. "We'll choose each other again, won't we?" Amira whispered. Elijah nodded. "Even when you're afraid, even when I stumble, every day, we choose again." That night, they lay in silence, no words needed because a new life was already forming, not just within her, but between them.